Hi there, this is the Athletic Football Podcast weekend preview, and we're focusing on the Premier League's 5 fixtures in this match week 21. I'm Adam Leventhal. Welcome to the show, and welcome Jon Mackenzie. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm ready for another one. It's good to have you back. We'll be going through the predictions and see how you fared in a few moments' time. Luke Bosher is back in the studio. How are you?
Delighted to be here, Adam, as always.
That's good. And Jay Harris is back as well. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. You?
I'm good. You looking forward to seeing Ivan Toney back?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, and I think he'll hit the ground running. So
yeah. Well, we co-authored a piece this week.
We did. We
about
teamed up.
The return of Ivan Toney. If you want to check that out, if you're listening, thanks once again. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for having us. So this is the second half of the winter break. So we do have 5 games once again. The fixture formation is 2-2-1 from Saturday through until Monday. Let's run you through the fixtures. Saturday 12:30, Arsenal in 4th, 5 points off the top, up against Crystal Palace in 14th, who are 5 points above the drop zone. Saturday 5:30 kickoff. It is Brentford in 16th, 3 points above the relegation zone. But as we mentioned, Ivan Toney is back. They're up against Forest, who are just a point and a place above them in 15th. On Sunday at 2 o'clock, it is the bottom club, Sheffield United, 8 points from safety now against West Ham, who quite remarkably are 6th in the table. Sunday 4:30, it is one of the form sides of the Premier League, Bournemouth up against the leaders, Liverpool, who are 2 points clear of Manchester City. And then the Monday night football is Brighton in 8th against Wolves in 11th. Now, we did our predictions last week, and I just wanted to run you through how everyone fared. You'll remember it was Nick, Jacob and John were in the studio. Jacob did very well indeed. Manchester United against Tottenham, he got correct as far as a score draw is concerned. He got the Chelsea home win against Fulham, and he predicted that it was going to be Burnley 1, Luton 1.
Got a bit lucky with that one, though, didn't you?
Very lucky, as did Luton. Very, very lucky. Just a quick straw poll on that incident. That was a foul, was it not, from Adebayo on Trafford?
I think so.
Yeah.
He knew what he was doing.
He did know what he was doing, didn't he? And that didn't seem to be taken into consideration. What do you think?
Yeah,
Bosh?
I agree. I think goalkeepers get a lot of protection, too much in general, but I think on this time it was the wrong decision.
Yeah, it's a foul.
It was, wasn't it? It was very strange. I was very confused by that. I was on air at the time. I was watching. I was like, what is going on? Going back to the predictions, Newcastle against Manchester City. John, Nick as well said City would score 3 in an away win. At one point, I thought my prediction of Newcastle 2, Manchester City 1 was going to come off, and it would have been the most genius prediction, but obviously it didn't come off. No one predicted the draw between Everton and Villa. We will be doing more predictions on this episode, and we will start our preview with the Vitality. At the Vitality. So Sunday, 4:30, it is Bournemouth hosting Liverpool, and this should be a good game. Bournemouth still in really good form, despite losing against Spurs last time out. In fact, they've picked up the most points of any team over the past 8 games, and that's after they failed to win in their first 9 games, which included 6 defeats. It's quite remarkable. And John, we have to start with you. Have you moved your poster of Andoni Iraola above your bed now, where John Stones used to be?
Yeah, one on each side, yeah.
You do love him though, don't you? And I guess you're really glad that this season has evolved rather than, hitting a dead end so early.
Yeah, I was a bit worried for a bit, because I'd sort of set my store out saying that he was going to be good, and the starting position wasn't great. Like you say, really bad for the first 9 games. But through that whole time, I was consistently saying the reason why this isn't working is because the pressing triggers are off. You can see that he likes to engage a high press, has players backing up from deep, and you have to jump at the right times. If you don't, you leave players free. And in the Premier League, if you leave free men like that in the build-up, teams will just run through you, and that was happening over and over and over again. But
so why was it not on point to start off with?
Because I think that when you're playing that kind of system, so much of it is we often talk about pressing triggers, right? And it makes it sound as though when you're pressing, all you need to do is be like, oh, if they've got the ball and they pass it backwards, then we move forward a bit, or if the ball goes this way, then we all move. But actually, I think when it comes to a system like Andoni Iraola's pressing approach, it's a lot more intuitive. So you're not just reading a sort of one-to-one map where you're like, okay, the ball's been passed, so this is my trigger to go. You have to know that a lot of players will have maybe a couple, maybe even 3 players that they're going to be responsible for, and their responsibility is going to change depending on what's happening elsewhere. So there's a huge amount that you have to keep in your head at any one time. And if you, like I said, if you get the timing wrong, then it all falls to pieces. But there's a good piece by Tom Harris actually in The Athletic, just talking. He uses a few screenshots in his article to show a few examples against Arsenal where you can see the players unsure about whether or not they should go. Whether or not they should move and pass the player on. And as soon as you have any kind of uncertainty like that in your pressing system at this level, you just get punished for it. And now what we're starting to see is that the timing is much better. Those triggers are being read properly. And there's been a bit of, I suppose, a structural change as well. So Ryan Christie has been moved back into the double pivot. He was playing as a 10. He's dropped back. And I think that's made a huge amount of difference because often that player has to be the one who's doing a huge amount of decision making for the rest of the team behind him. So if he goes, then everyone else will follow him, and he's an exceptional presser and an exceptional reader of the press. So I think moving him around has actually changed things as well.
One of the central people in that Bournemouth side at the moment is Dominic Solanke, in great form, 12 goals in all, 8 in his last 9 games, and he's up against the side that sold him. Luke, what have you noticed about how he has played this season in comparison with last season? When you see him now, do you think, wow, yeah, he's the real deal, which maybe you didn't think about in the Premier League, maybe in the Championship, but in the Premier League previously?
Yeah, I think those were always the questions over Solanke, is that he'd proven he could do it at a lower level, and making the step up last year. Bournemouth were quite conservative under Gary O'Neill. I think Tom Harris mentions in that article about how deep they were, and that worked for them. That was a system that worked for them. They stayed in the Premier League quite comfortably in the end, but I think that was to the detriment of Solanke's kind of goal-scoring ability. And I think this season, because Iraola's football is so much more front foot, they just naturally create more chances, and that means, your goal scorer who started all your games is going to get more chances. And I think Solanke's, right the way, he was at Chelsea before Liverpool, he's always been known as a very good finisher and someone who, could use his strength to kind of keep the ball, but Bournemouth under O'Neill didn't really use that, whereas they do use that under Iraola. And I think the other key thing this season, especially, in that sort of 4-2-3-1 that John was kind of talking about, I think the supporting cast at Bournemouth is a lot better. Someone like Antoine Semenyo looks really, really good. Justin Kluivert, who was, a bit of a lost soul before with, stints in France and Italy, looks, really, really accomplished playing in that kind of number 10 role. And they've got other players like Dango Ouattara, and they've signed Luis Sinisterra as well. And, in the last couple of games, I think Alex Scott has looked unbelievable. And when you have talented players behind you, I think it makes, the job of a striker that much easier. So it's kind of all coming together for Solanke at the perfect time.
It was interesting hearing Eddie Howe actually being quite open about the fact that he really likes Dominic Solanke. Obviously, he signed him when he was the Bournemouth manager. He's obviously now at Newcastle, and he said that he wouldn't be able to afford him, however much he would like to sign him. What level do you think Solanke can reach? Can he, get back up to the Chelsea or Liverpool? Well, maybe not Chelsea at the moment, but Liverpool level, being a Champions League striker.
Don't want to put too much rain on his parade, because I've been really impressed by him this season as well. And I remember when Brentford drew 2-2 with Bournemouth, I think the thing that stood out the most for me, which always helps when you see people in the flesh, is just his combination of speed, technical ability and strength. And that's really rare for a striker to have all 3 of them. Obviously, he scored 12 goals this season, but he'd never surpassed more than 6 in the Premier League before. So yes, I think he's a fantastic talent, but don't want us to get too carried away thinking that, okay, all of a sudden he deserves to be bracketed as a world-class striker. I still think he's got to show a little bit more before that.
So an England call-up too soon?
I think on form he deserves at least a look in March, but I think he'd have to continue on his current trajectory to get into the European Championship squad in the summer. But I certainly think he's finally realising his potential, because obviously when he was at Chelsea they thought he was going to be the next big thing. When he was at Liverpool, they thought he was going to be the next big thing. So he's taken a slightly backwards route to get to the top, considering where he started, because I think he's now 26. So I'm sure a couple of years ago, people thought he's never going to fulfill that potential. But I think now he finally is. So yes, I think in the long-term future, maybe within the next year or two, he does kick on and make that move to a bigger club, but I'm not too sure if right now is that moment.
I've been watching a lot of Premier League strikers because I'm doing a bit of a longer term project looking at shot timing, so how long it takes players to get shots away. I've been really impressed with Dominic Solanke because I've gone through and watched all of his open play shots that aren't headers this season, and it's a really good opportunity to see what strikers are like when you watch all of their chances in fairly quick succession. But the thing that I think maybe impressed me most about him is that he has like an incredible diversity of ways of generating shots and chances, which makes him, I think, a dangerous prospect for any big club. For example, Darwin Núñez is a player who I would say has an incredible athletic upside, but he's very one-dimensional in terms of the sorts of shots he wants. So he will often, the 2 goals he scored against Newcastle, where pulls it back across the keeper from the right-hand side. The other thing he does is he drifts in from the left, cuts inside, and then tries to hit the top corner. Those are the main ways that he is trying to generate goals. But if you watch Solanke's goals this season, they've just come from an incredible array of different areas, different types of shots. He can score with his head as well. So I think with that, on top of the fact that he's a very good link-up player, and also the fact that he's now playing in a system with Andoni Iraola where he's expected to be able to press well, I think all of that makes him quite a nice prospect for a team who's maybe looking for a striker where they think actually we might be able to get an elite striker for not the most expensive that you might expect to pay for that kind of striker. So I'm kind of interested to see what happens to him in the summer in particular.
I think though it's an interesting one, looking at the summer, because Solanke signed a new deal, I think right at the beginning of this season until 2027. So, coming into the summer, he'll still have 3 years left on his contract, which I think puts Bournemouth in a hugely advantageous position, because I think with those kind of players, you're normally looking at maybe 2 years is when you want to sell, because any later than that and their value starts depreciating. So it kind of depends how much of a fuss he kicks up, but Bournemouth could charge, I think the figure with the sort of Newcastle report that was then later quietened down was about 60-70 million, and that leaves about 4 or 5 Premier League clubs that could do that. So it's potentially quite a small market for him, and because he's English and he's in the Premier League, it seems that he'll stay in the league, right? It wouldn't really make sense for him to go to a Barcelona or Real Madrid. I know that's getting a bit carried away, but it could be that if Iraola is building something and Bournemouth end up, as they are kind of on pace to finish in the top half, he might stay for another year, and then you're looking at summer 2025 when he'd be 27, I think, and still probably with 5 years left at his prime before he moves on.
He's an interesting prospect insofar as you say, like he's reaching that point where if he's going to get his big contract, it's like next summer or the following summer. So I'm kind of interested to see whether or not that, like you said, if he wants to make that big move, I think he's probably justified it, and so it will depend how much, as you said, of a fuss that he makes about it. But
let's move the conversation onto Liverpool. They can go 5 points clear at the top. Obviously, the focus going into this game will be that they're going for the title, but obviously it is their first Premier League game without Mo Salah, who's at AFCON. In the simplest of terms, how do they fill the void left by Salah, do you think?
Well, obviously they've got so many different attacking options. Obviously nobody's on the level of quality that Salah is, but obviously they can slot in Diogo Jota, Cody Gakpo, Diaz, Núñez. There's more than enough variety within that team to find different ways to score, even if their best player's missing.
Who do you think they will miss more, John? Because obviously they're missing Salah, they're missing Trent Alexander-Arnold. Enzo is at the Asia Cup as well with Japan. Who do you think in that Liverpool side has the most impact on how they play, their dynamic?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously with Mo Salah you've got a player he's pure goals, and that makes a big difference. But at the moment it feels as though Liverpool definitely are structuring their play around Trent Alexander-Arnold for obvious reasons as well, because he's giving a huge amount of production from in terms of the progressive passing that he can do. And it does feel as though with them moving him inside a little bit more and changing the tactics up, that it's all being done for the benefit of Trent Alexander-Arnold. So if you don't have Trent Alexander-Arnold playing in that system, then the changes that are going to come from it, I think, are changes that probably would have benefited Mohamed Salah. I think in this system, Salah has to do a lot more work in the wide areas because Alexander-Arnold's moved inside, so the channel opens up. You either have one of your central midfielders moving out there, or Salah drops deep. I could show you plenty of clips this season of Mohamed Salah in possession, almost looking like a fullback because he's had to drop in so far, and so that takes him away from goal. So, in many respects, I feel as though missing Trent Alexander-Arnold sort of it raises questions about what they're going to be doing in terms of the tactical approach. Do they go back to what they were doing before? Do they just simply play without an inverting fullback, which I think personally would suit Liverpool better anyway, for the reasons that we mentioned. For example, it gets Salah in higher, closer to the goal. If you don't have Salah, I suppose you then have a sort of double knock-on, which is the system doesn't quite fit the players that you've got, even if you have very good players. And if you switch that system up, you've not got Salah there to benefit from it either. So I think they'll miss. You always miss Salah, whatever system you're playing. But I think that they will miss Trent Alexander-Arnold precisely because the whole system is set up for him to actually help them move the ball down the field. And if they can't get the ball into those those attacking players, then yeah, they're going to be in trouble.
Obviously, the narrative about them going 5 points clear of Manchester City is important in this game, and people will be thinking almost that maybe it's just going to come down to when Liverpool and Manchester City face each other in a couple of months' time. But what's your feeling on this Liverpool side, Luke? Do you see them as title winners, or do you think that they're just sort of a placeholder for once Manchester City really gather pace?
Yeah, I think City are, with De Bruyne coming back, obviously that's all the talk that, the classic under Pep Guardiola, second half of the season, they absolutely blitz everyone. But I think Liverpool, from especially their last couple of games, they're doing that thing that kind of would-be champions often do, which is win games without playing that well or as well as they could do. And, we kind of saw that in it wasn't the Premier League, but that 2-0 FA Cup win against Arsenal, particularly when Klopp changed things at half-time. They looked way better with Nunez on the left and Diaz on the right. And that's kind of, goes back to those without Salah solutions that I think Klopp is very good at getting. And that's why I think Trent, as John said, will be an even bigger miss. But I think I've been really impressed by Liverpool this whole season. They've gone under the radar a little bit because obviously Tottenham started the season so well, and Arsenal started well and have kind of carried off a little bit, and then City have been a bit up and down, and they never feels like they've been the sort of main storyline in this Premier League season, which I think has allowed them to kind of go a bit unnoticed. And they've dealt with so many injury problems this season, particularly in defence. Andy Robertson, then Tsimikas going down, Trent now. Matip's out for the season, but they have still managed to, put themselves in a great position to look into the second half of the season as title contenders. And I think obviously we have no way of knowing how the next 15, 20 games are going to go, but I imagine they're going to fight Man City right to the wire. I
think they've evolved a lot this season. Like the Trent Alexander-Arnold inversion that everyone talks about, when they were first doing that, they were trying to be like Man City to a degree. They wanted Trent Alexander-Arnold almost playing as a midfielder, and essentially what's happened is as the season's gone on, they've realised he's not particularly well suited to that role, and so he's almost playing as like in what people now call a quarterback role, where he just sits deep, picks the ball up outside of the opposition block, facing down the play, and because he's such a good ball striker, probably the best ball striker in the world, he can, once he's in that sort of position, you're in a huge amount of problem as a team. So I think that what Liverpool maybe started off not quite so good, and are now much better than they were, and so that again, that sort of gives you a funny sense of exactly how good this Liverpool team are.
Much like Bournemouth.
Yes, of course.
Maybe at certainly a different level. So Liverpool top of the table on 45 points, Bournemouth 12th with 25 points, but they are two of the form teams in the league. Let's get your predictions, Jay.
2-1 Liverpool.
2-1 to Liverpool.
I have
Luke.
Exactly the same on my card.
On your card? I'd like it if you prepared a card. And John?
Do I go for the Bournemouth upset? It's not very likely, but yeah, go on. I'll say Bournemouth are going to win 2-1.
2-1?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, and I will go for a Liverpool 3-1 win. Next, we are off to the Emirates.
You didn't mention your predictions from last week.
No, because I didn't get any right.
You mentioned one that you nearly got right.
I nearly got right. No, actually, the only one I got right was predicting a draw in the game between Burnley and Luton. Okay, now we will go off to the Emirates. So Saturday lunchtime, it is Arsenal against Crystal Palace. Arsenal have lost 4 of their last 7 in all competitions, and that includes only 1 win. They've lost their last 3 in all competitions, scoring only 1 goal in the process. They've been in Dubai for some warm weather training for the last week or so. So, hopefully for them and their fans, it will be the perfect reset, Jay. Are you looking a little bit worried, a bit concerned about what's happening at Arsenal, or are you just thinking, no, come on, look, we're fine. We'll bounce back and everything will be fine again?
No, a little bit concerned. I think the 2 games, over Christmas, New Year against West Ham and Fulham, where they lost, I think they're a little bit concerning just because I think by the 55th minute, the 60th minute of both games, I just knew that Arsenal weren't going to get anything out of them.
Because they'd started so strongly and wasted chances, or that it wasn't...
Just very laboured in possession, felt very predictable. When you've got Saka and Odegaard, and sometimes it does work, kind of like cutting in from the right-hand side and kind of whipping crosses into the box to Nketiah and Jesus. It's not the most effective tactic because you wouldn't call either of those two the most dominant strikers aerially. So that was definitely a little bit of a concern. I've spoken about this on the Handbrake Off Arsenal podcast that we do, but Saka and Martinelli had a really, really high output last season. And for Saka, that was probably in trend with how he's been over the last 3 or 4 seasons, whereas Martinelli was a little bit more of an outlier. So the worry was that just an exceptional season from Martinelli, and teams have kind of worked out how to stop him from getting on the ball in better positions now. And so it feels like Arteta's just trying to grasp what his best Arsenal 11 is at the moment, because at the moment it just feels like Saka's being marked out of games, Martinelli's being marked out of games. Obviously this Havertz experiment, there's times where it kind of works and he scored some big goals, and then there's times where he doesn't look completely comfortable. Obviously Gabriel Jesus and Nketiah are not the most potent strikers. So yeah, a little bit worried. And if they don't get a win from this game, I think you can pretty much count them out of the title race at this point.
John, from your point of view, obviously we've spoken about their goal-scoring issues, and we've spoken about the fact that maybe it's a psychological thing. I suppose if you get away, get a bit of sun on your back, try and just sort of go...
And, eat some food from Salt Bay.
Well, yeah, of course. Arteta pictured eating... I mean... I'm not a meat eater, so it wasn't really something that I got into. But
Arteta looked very into it.
He looked really, absolutely. He was all in, wasn't it? So it's these sort of moments in a season that sometimes, not necessarily, they don't always have to involve Salt Bay. They just need to involve a little bit of a breather. It may well be that Arsenal start as they did against Liverpool, like a train, and one of those early chances goes in and they catch fire again. Do you get that feeling, or do you think that would be a false economy almost, and they need to make some changes?
I think calling it psychological is smart because it makes it sound as though the issues aren't structural.
Yeah.
And it gives them a chance to, as you said, get away and try and reset. But I do think that a lot of the problems that Jay's been talking about there, they're not psychological problems. There have been finishing issues, which are always going to impact teams in these sorts of situations. But the problem is that they have to nail all of their shots because they're creating so few dangerous ones that when you go through those spells where you're not finishing at the level that you might want to, it has a much bigger impact on your overall thing. So on your overall approach. So for me, Arsenal have a lot of structural problems that we can talk about in terms of, a lot of people say predictable, but I think Arsenal struggle to build up, and as a result of that, they move players deeper in the field to try and help move the ball down the field, which means when they do move the ball down the field, not only do they have fewer players forward, but it takes them longer to arrive in the opposition box. And I think last season we talked about Martinelli and Saka having good seasons. In part, I think that was because they were so dynamic. They were able to get forward quite quickly. How many times last season did we see Zinchenko, for example, receive the ball in the middle, carry it forward, and you've got the opposition backpedaling, you've got lots of space to attack. Whereas this season it feels like we barely see that happening ever. And Arsenal are constantly trying to break down a low block. And I mentioned before that I'm doing some research on strikers' timings and the amount of touches it takes for them to get shots away. I had a look at Kai Havertz and Gabriel Jesus and compared them to Erling Haaland, which is probably an unfair comparison because what I'm finding out from this research is that Erling Haaland is a freak. He's about 25% quicker getting shots away than pretty much all Premier League strikers. But when we look at particularly Gabriel Jesus, he takes on average 2.8 touches per shot, which is way more than even Kai Havertz, who's at 2 touches per shot.
And Haaland is what?
1.75.
Right.
So
it takes an extra touch.
Yeah, he's basically and that's in part because he plays like a false nine role, right, where he's dropping out, which means when he receives the ball, often he's further away from the goal, which is fine. You can play that role well, but I think what we're starting to find, and I think what's so interesting about Man City going for Erling Haaland, is that when you have a box presence and you realise that actually you're much more likely to score if you can get shots away early because the opposition can't really set. You're going to have the goalkeeper not set to make the save as well. Is that if you have one of those players who's really elite, you can get shots away. You're going to generate a load of goals, even if those situations aren't necessarily, you would consider them great goal-scoring situations. So I think that's the lesson that I certainly learned from watching Erling Haaland last season, is that it's incredible how quick he receives the ball, gets it into a position where he can swing his leg at it, and then hits it all at once. And I think that's the position that Arsenal is struggling with right now, because they don't have anyone who's able to be in the position to take those quick shots, 1-touch shots, 2-touch shots with a really quick touch to set the shot. And I think that's partly what's holding them back as well.
And it's a confidence thing as well, isn't it? To take those shots early, you need to sort of be in the groove.
Yeah.
And none of their strikers are at the moment.
The Kai Havertz chance against Liverpool in the FA Cup, was it FA Cup?
Yeah.
Where he receives the ball from Erdegaard, he could take a first-time shot. It's not maybe the easiest shot. He ends up taking a touch and ends up having 4 touches before getting the ball away. That's a classic example, because you can slow that down. When the ball first arrives at him, it's just him and the goalkeeper, and it's arriving on his favoured foot. And it's a little bit behind him, but he's got the whole goal to aim for. He's inside the box, doesn't take the shot, and then eventually takes a shot. And there's 5 defenders between him and the goalkeeper at that point. So the longer you take to get your shots away, the more the opposition are going to be able to make it difficult for you to score. So I think maybe shot timing is a place for Arsenal to have a look at how they could be a bit more dangerous.
I was just quickly going to say, I think Arsenal fans are desperate to see more of Emile Smith-Rowe as well. A couple of seasons ago, I think when Arteta first took over, it was Smith-Rowe and Saka who basically carried the team.
They've got their song together. It's a bit
course.
weird now. Has Saka got a song by himself now?
Yeah.
He has?
Yeah, Starboy.
Fine. Okay, good. I wonder if Emile Smith-Rowe feels a bit bad that he's sort of been biffed out of this joint song.
Well, obviously he's had quite a few injury issues over the last couple of seasons, but I think what frustrates Arsenal fans is that he'll come on 10 minutes left of the game when Arsenal are drawing or losing, and he's kind of expected to kind of pull a rabbit out of a hat. I think what all Arsenal fans want to see is him given a chance. If Havertz is not producing, or if it's somebody else who's not producing, then just give Smith-Rowe a good 60, 70 minutes, 2-3 games in a row, and see if he can kind of get that match sharpness back up, and see if he can kind of contribute, because he's a very dynamic and clever player when he gets the opportunity to.
Where in Arsenal's current team would you put him? In that kind of left 8 role that Havertz has played? Or?
I think so, because I think he kind of excelled the most, because obviously he's right-footed. And I think he was really good at kind of hovering in the left and kind of drifting inside. But he's also a very good combination player and a link-up player, and he can kind of make those 1-2s with people. I think there was one stage where he kind of had a little bit of a habit of coming in from the left and kind of slotting the ball into the right, with his right foot into the bottom right corner. But then the team has evolved since then. Odegaard was not around when Smith-Rowe and Saka first came to the fore. Odegaard is obviously now the main man now. So I think it's also a case of Smith-Rowe needs to work out or needs to adjust his game to complement the other players, if that makes sense.
I want to talk about Crystal Palace. And before doing the podcast, I read a really good piece from Matt Woosnam, who is our reporter for Palace for The Athletic, using sort of phrases like the club are in a bit of a holding pattern at the moment. There's a lot of lethargy. He was describing about Roy Hodgson obviously getting criticism from the fans, and also that Hodgson had said, or maybe we can sort of, he didn't use these words because I know historically from his time at Watford he doesn't like it, but we can maybe take the handbrake off in the FA Cup and go for it, because we're not really having to worry too much about relegation this season. Now they're out of the FA Cup, 14th, only 5 points above the drop zone, 2 wins out of their last 15, including 8 defeats. They're in a bad place at the moment, aren't they, Luke?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, losing to Everton in the manner that they did, missing quite a few chances. It was a game that could have gone either way. As Matt said in that article, it basically deads their season. If you look at the possibility of more teams below them getting points deductions, and already the bottom three, many people have that as it is, Sheffield United, Luton, Burnley, going down, maybe irrespective of those points deductions. Palace, touch wood if you're a Palace fan, look to be safe with 19, 20 games left of the season. So it's something that, like, when I look at the Palace squad, I'm kind of reminded of something that NFL fans and NFL teams talk about, which is like a club's or a team's Super Bowl window. And obviously, I don't mean like Palace are going to be challenging for the title or top four, but I mean, in NFL terms, that's kind of when your squad, everything's like kind of perfect at the right time. You've got all the right players on both sides of the ball, and maybe you've got a great coach, great quarterback. And I look at the Palace squad, and I'm so impressed by it. Czech Decore, Eze, Olise, Gehi, Anderson. Even you look in goal, I think Sam Johnson, Dean Henderson. That's quality. Two quality Premier League players. But I'm a big fan of Roy Hodgson, and I think he's proven himself to be a great manager over many years. But making him essentially interim manager since last March just kind of says that we're not that bothered about this season, because it's like you're not building anything. No, I don't think anyone expects Roy Hodgson to be Palace manager beyond the end of this season, and maybe he may not even last that long if their current trend continues. So you've almost wasted a year of possible development for these players. And how many times has Eze and Olise and Gehi been linked to other bigger clubs since they've joined Palace? And even Decore, who joined summer 2022, was linked to Liverpool quite heavily in the summer, and he's gone down with a season-ending injury. But you think, how many of these players are still going to be there for a new head coach in the summer? It's like Palace have kind of missed their opportunity. Had they appointed maybe a slightly more ambitious manager this summer to push for a top half finish. And I think it's fair for their fans. You look at Bournemouth, who appointed Andoni Iraola. I'm sure if Iraola had been offered the Palace job, they're a bigger club, they've got more money, more resources, they had on paper a stronger squad at the start of the season, better raw resources to work with. It's fair, I think, for Palace fans to be like, well, we could have had that. Instead we've got another year of Roy where we're signalling that we're not ambitious and we're not really aiming that high, and we're just kind of like, we're happy to finish 15th. And it's really shown on the pitch where they've really... And I know they've had injuries. They've had injuries to key players this season. But I think if I was a Palace fan, I'd be really disappointed with how this season has gone.
I think this season as well, with the fact that the three teams that came up, I think most people had them pipped to go down. So it's a season where you're almost guaranteed to stay up as long as you don't do something completely stupid. And obviously, sacking Roy Hodgson and bringing someone in who doesn't work might look as though you're doing something really stupid, but I think that's the conditions we're in now, right? That some teams are too worried to just push the boat out a little bit on trying a new manager because they're so worried about going down and because of the amount of money that the Premier League
Palace
gives
historically have been worried. Prior to Roy Hodgson coming in, it was Frank de Boer, wasn't it? Frank de Boer before Hodgson. And then obviously Vieira, and then he comes back. So they are the sort of the archetypal worry bead sort of club. And John, there is so much focus on Eze on the whole, but in particular in this game, because Olise is missing once again with an injury. They really need him in what is going to be his 100th Premier League appearance for Crystal Palace to be on form. And I suppose with Arsenal's confidence not great, he could be a match winner, couldn't you? You can picture it almost. You can see in that corner at the Emirates the Crystal Palace fans celebrating and him running off to them in a shock sort of Crystal Palace victory.
Yeah, I think for any team that is in the bottom half of the table perennially, you need your difference makers, and that can be the difference between you going deep in a cup or staying up in a season. And he's definitely that for them. A player who's been fantastic, I think, throughout his career, but has shown the ability to, he can play in the midfield areas, he can play in wide areas, he's creative, he offers you out of possession stuff that you want from a player in the middle as well. It's just a really, really important sort of profile of player for them. But yeah, it when we're talking about Crystal Palace as a team who, they need difference makers, and they've got Olise, they've got Eze, and again, it comes back to what we were saying before, is when you have players of that calibre who can change games, who could be the player who actually allows them to get a win at Arsenal. It's just a shame to see them not being used to their full potential.
Okay, we're going for our predictions now. Jay, Arsenal fan, come on, what's happening?
2-1 Arsenal.
Oh, I thought you were going to be a bit more overwhelmingly positive. 2-1. Okay,
yeah,
fine.
but they seem to concede a lot of goals this season. Although they've got a very good defence, they don't seem to keep that many clean sheets.
Okay. Luke?
2-0 Arsenal. 2-0.
John?
Yeah, I'm not going to be overly positive for Palace like I was for Bournemouth, I'm afraid. But yeah, let's say 1-0. I think the first fixture of the season when they played against each other, Arsenal relied on a bit of a dubious penalty call, so maybe it'll be tight. Maybe Palace will sit deep and cause Arsenal those problems that they hate. They're just having to break down low blocks, etc.
So 1-0, right?
1-0, yeah, to Arsenal.
You're all wrong. It's going to be 4-0 to Arsenal.
Oh, wow.
I thought you were going to say 4-0 to Crystal Palace.
No, 4-0 Arsenal. Okay, let's go through the rest of the games now. To the other 3 games in the Premier League, and the big one is Brentford against Nottingham Forest. Ivan Toney's return. Full podcast on this feed, all about it. This is massive for Brentford. It's the moment everyone's been waiting for, is it not?
Yeah, no, you've built it up. You built up the hype well. First and foremost, Toney scored 20 goals in the Premier League last season. Only Haaland and Kane had more. So it was obviously massive excitement to have a player of that quality back. But maybe more importantly, Brentford are just in a real bad run of form at the moment. They've lost 5 league games in a row. Got knocked out of the FA Cup by Wolves on Tuesday night in a replay. So I think over the course of those 2 games, they took the lead 3 times and somehow got dumped. And Mbumo's injured, Visser's at AFCON, Sharda's injured. There's a whole load of other injuries and personnel issues. So I think Brentford as a club and the fan base are just hoping that Toney can rediscover the form that he showed last season, which led to an England call-up straight away.
We are also in a January transfer window. Just for people who are catching up, there is no chance that he's going to return and then go, see you later.
I think I get asked the question about Toney's future every day of my life, and I have done for the last 2 years. No, I think he's staying. He's got 18 months left on his contract, so I understand why lots of people think Brentford should sell now, because it doesn't look like he's going to sign a contract extension. In the summer, he's only got a year left. He's clearly their most valuable asset, and obviously the risk of losing him for free the following summer will be something that's on Brentford's minds, right? But the potential candidates who could get him, your Arsenals, your Chelseas, I don't really think they have the financial wiggle room to pull that deal off in January. And we're talking a lot of money for Ivan Toney to go. So that's that part. But as I've just mentioned, Brentford are in a real bad run of form. They're 3 points above the relegation zone. The money that they'd get for staying in the Premier League would far outweigh the money that they receive from selling Ivan Toney. So I'm sure the club are looking at it thinking, if we keep Ivan Toney for another 4 or 5 months and it knocks 10 million, 15 million pounds of his price, but we stay in the Premier League, that's fine. We'll sell him in the summer and we'll all be happy.
Let's talk about Nottingham Forest, that side of this fixture. And it has been a turbulent week for them with their punishment from the Premier League due to profit and sustainability rules. There may well be a points deduction incoming. What's your feeling on it, Luke? Obviously, you're part of our news team here at The Athletic. It's been quite a dominant story this week, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, given what happened to Everton earlier this season and the fact that Everton have also been charged, you know, we're even though Everton have been given a points deduction, we're still in quite uncharted territory in terms of the Premier League. You know, that points deduction for Everton for a financial breach was the first of its kind in the Premier League. And now Forest have been done again and Everton have been done again. And Forest believe they have these mitigating circumstances with the fact that they delayed the potential, or the actual sale of Brennan Johnson, you know, beyond the PSR window in order to get more money for him. And the fact that they did get more money for him, if they had sold him for that much when they initially could have, they'd be fine. That's their kind of argument. And make of that what you will. I don't know. I feel like if you're of a Forest persuasion, you're probably like, oh well, yeah, that's fine. That makes sense. But then, you know, the other side to the coin is that these dates are there. They're hard and fast. They didn't have enough money at the correct time, so they have to get done. And we'll see what happens on the pitch, whether that has an impact. You kind of saw with Everton when they got done earlier this season, that kind of galvanised them a bit. I think, you know, they went on a pretty good run under Dyche, which has kind of dipped in the last few weeks. But Forest under Nuno, they've been going quite well on the pitch, kind of ignoring the FA Cup weirdness against Blackpool. It was where they were taken to a replay and then scraped through. They lost to Bournemouth, impressive Bournemouth, but Forest had Willy Bolly sent off early on. They only just lost. Then they beat Newcastle, thanks to Chris Wood, and then they beat Man United. So they're going well, and I think Nuno was criticised a lot for how it went at Tottenham, and then he had some time in the Middle East that no one really cares about or knows about. It may as well have just not happened. But he did well at Wolves. That's the thing that I think people are forgetting, because it didn't go very well at Tottenham, and he's clearly a good coach, and he knows how to coach a team defensively. I think his Wolves side before were always pretty good defensively. The only struggle I think this week and maybe the week after will be, I'm pretty sure they're going to be without Morgan Gibbs-White, who is, I think, undoubtedly their best player, their most creative player. He captained them, quite a lot this season, so he's an influential figure in their dressing room. So it'll be a very interesting matchup against Brentford. It's going to be close to call, I think.
Sorry, you said Chris Wood and I just drifted off because, not in a rude way, but because of the circumstances they signed him under, where it was, if he was named in the Matchday squad 3 times, they'd pay, was it £15 million, and he'd go on 100k a week wages, which for a club in the bottom half of the table, paying any players of 100,000 a week, to me is just, it kind of sums up why they're in the position that they're in, and obviously the Harry Arter situation as well.
But then was Chris Wood worth it for that Newcastle game alone?
Well, that's the counter argument. At least, they probably can say he did something.
Let's get your predictions on this one. Brentford against Forest. How many is Ivan Toney going to score? Come on.
Come to me last.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. John?
I'm going to say 2-1 Brentford. A much-needed fillip for Brentford.
Luke?
1-1. Toney to score.
Toney's going to score, isn't he? I think the score is going to be 2-3. Forest are going to win 3-2. Jay?
I think it's going to be 2-2.
2-2. Okay, we shall see. Right, let's move on to Sheffield United against West Ham. Bad week for West Ham, going out of the FA Cup against Bristol City. They're 6th in the Premier League, West Ham, which I think for people who haven't necessarily been dialed in, they might have lost track over Christmas. The FA Cup games have been coming, but they are the closest challengers to the top 5. They don't necessarily feel that, or am I doing them an injustice?
No, you're not. If you look at their underlying numbs, they don't look particularly good.
Of course.
If you break down the underlying numbers further by game state, so in terms of whether or not they're winning, losing or drawing, the amount of expected goals that they're generating, what I found, I looked at this morning just out of interest, because I was like, how are they so low on the expected goal difference table right at the bottom? They're sort of putting up like relegation level numbers. They're very good when they're even in games. So when the score is, when they're drawing, they're pretty good. They're putting up more expected goals than they're conceding. In almost every other game state, they're rubbish. So what's been happening is that they've been going ahead because they've been playing okay. They as we know, David Moyes has them very well coached to be able to hit teams on the break, and then they're managing to hold out from those point onwards. If they concede a goal, it doesn't look like they're coming back. But I think what's been happening is just everything's fallen for them this season in terms of getting the goals when they needed to, and then being able to hang on long enough for it to work out. So really interesting proposition. But I suppose that's the way they sort of play under Moyes. It's very good counter-attacking football where they've got real difference makers in their front line, whether or not they'll still be there and thereabouts, as they say, at the end of the season, I think depends on how many more games they can go into and get the first goal.
Sheffield United look down pretty much, don't they? I mean, they're 8 points from safety. Chris Wilder's return hasn't really caught light. I mean, I suppose it's all relative because they weren't doing particularly well before he arrived. They did pick up slightly. They got a draw and they got a win against Brentford. But on the whole, it's 6 Premier League games. They've lost 4, drawn 1. That win against Brentford, could they repeat it against West Ham potentially? Was there anything in particular that they did in that game that was sort of like a magic dart?
I mean, I think it was James McAtee scores a really good goal, but otherwise it was a pretty non-eventful game. I do think Sheffield United probably outperformed Brentford, but didn't come away blown away. I think obviously the big kick in the teeth was when they lost at home to Luton Town, Sheffield United, because they're the games that if they...
A couple of spawny goals as well, wasn't it?
I
wasn't
forgot
it?
about this spawny weird phrase that you use.
You're familiar with spawny, aren't you?
I'm familiar. I would never use it.
That's fine.
Particularly in public like this.
But they got lucky, didn't they, Luton, in that game with a couple of deflections and things. I'm not speaking bad of Luton. It could have been any team, but I felt.
You sure you're not speaking badly of Luton?
Have strong feelings about Luton.
No, it just seemed my path just seems to cross with them quite a lot.
Nothing to do
in games like this. No. It's the Burnley thing. Obviously, the Sheffield United two own goals or whatever it was, deflections.
Yes, they were. Luton were lucky in that game, but obviously Sheffield United were still 2-1 up at one point and maybe didn't manage the game particularly well. It looks like they're not going to stay up in the league this season, but obviously it's the important caveat that they lost their two best players in the summer, Sanderberg and Ilman and Jai. So it felt like Heckingbottom was working with his hands tied behind his back at the start of the season, and I think they just signed somebody recently. I can't think who it is off the top of my head. Have they got Ben Brereton Diaz on loan? Yeah. Maybe he'll come in and be a sensation, but they've just not got that level of investment and that level of quality that other Premier League sides have. So I can't see them doing anything this weekend either.
Okay, so having said that, prediction, Jay?
I'm going to go 1-0 West Ham.
1-0 West Ham. Luke?
Yeah, I've gone 0-1 too.
0-1.
John?
Yeah, interesting that you guys are going low scoring, but I guess it is a game that, it's the sort of team that West Ham could struggle against if they're not going to allow them any space. But yeah, I think West Ham are going to win, so I'll say 2-0 West Ham. Couple of spawny goals.
Bowen's like a doubt, and then they don't have Kudos, right? So.
Paqueta.
I might have to change.
Yeah.
Scrap everything I just said. Sheffield United are bringing the points home. Change my mind.
Can I go back to 1-0? The other way.
Are you going to change? You can. It's not committed to the official judging panel as yet. Do it quickly.
1-1.
1-1. Okay, good. 1-1. The score is actually going to be 2-1 to Sheffield United.
You're so contrary.
Well, I have to. I believe in these. I believe in them.
He still hasn't got one right.
I believe him.
So make of that what you want.
Can I ask, has there been any game this season where you've predicted Luton to win?
Not that I can recall.
We've only been doing it for 3 weeks, haven't we? Where you join in. In fact, maybe only 2 weeks.
Exactly. So this is a new
small
thing.
Sample size.
As I've said before, I'm far from being a Luton supporter. I'm the polar opposite of that. But they do certain things pretty well.
If Luton stayed up on the final day of the season, how would it make you feel?
Depends who went down in their place. Okay? It depends. Okay. Because there might be something quite funny that happens and a team that out of nowhere goes down. Like a Forest or an Everton or a Brentford or someone random goes down and you think, fair enough, that's quite fun. But we shall see. Let's not worry about that now. We will preview that in however many months' time. I think you're just making that up because I don't think Everton... a lot of people would like to see Everton go down, but like Brentford going down, I don't think people would find that funny, would they? Last game. It is Brighton against Wolves. It's tough to glam this one up, I think. Wolves played 100...
He thinks he can glam it up.
Oh, Bosher in Hipster Corner. Go on then.
No, I just think I think basically any game involving Brighton this season is going to be exciting because they concede a lot of goals and they score a lot of goals.
They've got João Pedro as well.
Well, yeah, he's just an absolute penalty merchant though. But apart from that,
he's a wonderful player. He'll be playing. I would have thought he'll be playing Champions League football in maybe next season. Do you think they'll be able to hold on to him?
It's an interesting one because some of the players that have been bought from Brighton haven't necessarily worked at their, next club. So I think maybe teams might take a step back and, assess the player after, having played in the Premier League for a little bit longer.
I think you're giving some clubs far too much credit for being sensible. They'll see João Pedro scoring and just sign him regardless.
I don't know. I think I'd want to see personally him play another season at Premier League level.
Yeah, I agree,
especially under Roberto De Zerbi. But I'm kind of looking forward to this game. I think it will be good. I've been really impressed by Wolves under Gary O'Neill this year. They're one of the clubs, we talked about Forest. They very much were like, we're not going to spend too much this summer, and that arguably cost them Julen Lopetegui, who was a pretty good head coach by all accounts. But Gary O'Neill's come in, done a great job. Obviously, they're missing Hwang, who's away with South Korea at the Asian Cup. But to be honest, it's his strike partner Matheus Cunha that I've been really impressed with in recent weeks. I think in his last 7 games, Premier League games, he's got 4 goals and 3 assists, and he's kind of alternated from playing as their kind of number 9, played a bit on the left, and he's a very talented player. He was at RB Leipzig. And
Atletico Madrid.
And it didn't quite work for him there. He's still only 24, but I think he's a full Brazil international.
He is a player. I wonder if he'll be there next season.
And I think it was one of those things where I was watching a couple of Wolves games earlier this season. I think it was against Man United, and Cunha was quite, call it unlucky, call it poor finishing to not score. In my mind, I think he hit the post or crossbar or something, and I was quite impressed with him. But I was like, okay, maybe he's lacking a little bit. But it seems, almost since November, he's really come into his own. He looks a good player, and I kind of agree with Jay that he's very much a sellable asset for Wolves. In the summer, and I think it's going to be a good game. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And I like Wolves midfield. I think it's João Gomez and Mario Lemina. I think they've got a really great axis in this kind of 3-4-3 that Gary O'Neill's been toying with a little bit, and I like Wolves and I like Brighton, so I think it's going to be goals.
I think their squad is incredible. No one talks about how good the Wolves squad is, but you mentioned Hwang, you mentioned Cunha. They've got Pablo Sarabia, who was not a terrible player. Bellegarde as well.
Neto's coming back.
Neto's coming back. Yeah, they've got Tommy Boyle, Ryan Ait-Nouri further back. There's just so many good players in the squad that I agree.
Shame on you.
No,
why are you booing? He's right.
I need to justify my comment after that. I was just purely doing it positionally, that it's 8th Brighton against Wolves in 11th. But it brings me on to the point that I was going to make, that I think maybe Wolves, you wouldn't expect them to go on a surge and become the best of the rest. But Brighton have got a decent run coming up. Could you see them finishing as the best of the rest outside that top 5, if we expect Liverpool, Man City, Aston Villa and Arsenal and Tottenham to finish in that top 5? Do we see Brighton maybe getting in a more honest position above the likes of West Ham? That's obviously ruling out Manchester United from pulling themselves together, but do you see Brighton as that side?
They should be in that group for sure. I think this season they've struggled with not having a really physical player in their midfield, and they do tend to be quite lightweight because of the way that Roberto De Zerbi likes to play. Right, he likes to have lots of technical players. He likes to leave his fullbacks deeper to sort of cover. And you've got, James Milner is playing as a fullback as well, so maybe mobility issues there. And I think that's been the problem that De Zerbi has had to solve this time around with that defensive unit, because they could get away with it last season and they're not getting away with it this season. Teams know how to hurt them as well, so there's that level as well. So we've seen him tweaking things around, playing with a back 3 rather than just having 2 centre-backs deeper, just to try and avoid those kind of things. But I think that with De Zerbi, it's one of those things where when you consider the fact that he can't spend loads of money on players, I think the way that you improve this system is bringing in better players in those sorts of positions. And a central midfielder who's both technical and physically imposing is very expensive in the market. So, for me, Brighton are sort of victims of their own success almost in that respect. And it would be interesting to see Roberto De Zerbi, if he does go to a bigger club, what he'll look like when he has the capability to just bring in those players who can fix those tactical problems as well. But I think Brighton are certainly, as Luke says, they're super fun to watch. What they're doing is very different to what a lot of other teams in that sort of position are trying to do. And I think that if they go on this nice run now and things go well for them, then they'll definitely be crawling up the table. They'll get ahead of Man United at least, won't they?
Yeah. I like the image of them crawling up the table, dragging themselves.
Well, and it is a little bit more of a drag this season because they're having to spin the plate of the Europa League as well.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Let's get the predictions for this game, starting with this Festival of Football with Luke Bosher. Come on.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-2.
2-2. What a game it's going to be. Jay?
3-1 Brighton. Cunha's going to score for Wolves.
Yep, okay. John?
2-0 Brighton.
John, 2-0. And me, that game is going to be 1-1. There it is. That is all for today. Really appreciate you being on once again, Jay. Enjoy Ivan Toney's return.
Thank you very much.
He's going to score one of those penalties, isn't he? Probably.
He is probably going to score, yeah.
Probably. Luke, thank you very much. Are you going to a game this weekend?
No. With Chelsea not playing, my weekend's going to be great already.
Yeah.
Wait, does that mean you can play for our Sunday League team this weekend?
Maybe.
Okay.
Go on, put him on the spot. So now if he says yes,
yeah,
the fans will get on him if he doesn't play.
And the team is?
Ribblesdale Rovers.
Of David Walker fame.
Of David Walker fame.
Oh, fantastic. Great. And John?
What am I supposed to do here? No, it's not a prediction.
I'm just saying
is it?
goodbye.
Yeah.
Are you playing this
got
weekend?
worried.
Are you playing?
I thought you were asking me for a prediction for Ribblesdale Rovers. Who we got?
FC Parthenope or something like that.
Oh, they sound good.
yeah,
I'm going for a win.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for being on. IO is going to be back, as usual, on Monday. Just a reminder, if you want to be part of The Athletic, you can now sign up for £2 or $2 a month for the first 12 months by going to theathletic.com/football pod. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks very much for listening.
If you like this video, click subscribe for more content like this. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season to bring you the inside track to the biggest stories in football. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes for free, search the Athletic Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts from.